Tens of thousands of people have been told to self-isolate, a wedding operator has been fined and fresh infection sites have been named as health authorities in New South Wales try to get on top of what they say is a concerning amount of COVID-19 transmission. As 5 more confirmed coronavirus cases were linked to the cluster which originated at a bottle shop in Berala, the state government has this morning refused to rule out locking down the entire Cumberland Local Council area in Sydney's west. The scramble to get on top of the cluster comes as Sydney residents are forced to don masks inside public spaces or risk a penalty notice.
To show they mean business, police have issued fines to a Western Sydney function centre after 600 to 700 people attended a weekend wedding there, breaching social distancing rules. In Melbourne, authorities have promised to ramp up more COVID testing sites after a weekend which saw long queues forming, with some people turned away as the city deals with an outbreak linked to a Bayside Thai restaurant. Let's get more from our reporter in Melbourne, Elias, Clure, and Ruby Cornish, who joins us from Sydney. Good morning to both of you. Ruby, let's start in Sydney. The outbreak in Western Sydney continues to grow. What are the latest case numbers there?
Good morning, Isk. Yes, well, yesterday we heard about 8 new cases of COVID-19 here in New South Wales, 5 of them tied to the Berala cluster. So here, this BWS in Berala, it's the source of the Berala cluster. More than 2,000 people who've come through these doors over the past couple of weeks have been instructed to self-isolate for 14 days and get tested. And with the close contacts of those people also needing to isolate until negative test results come through, we have thousands, if not tens of thousands of people currently isolating here in Western Sydney. So we know that 2 staff at this BWS worked for 11 days while infectious. One thing that's really concerning our Chief Health Officer, Kerry Chan, is how easily it seems the virus was passed between the staff and customers. There are authorities looking at CCTV footage to try and determine that exact point of transmission, how that exactly happened. What we do know is from genomic sequencing, this cluster in the west is not genomically linked to the Avalon cluster on the northern beaches. This cluster has actually been traced back to a driver we heard about a month ago who got the infection from some travellers he was transporting to a quarantine hotel, passed it along to a colleague, and that colleague came to this BWS. So that's how this cluster emerged, not linked to the Avalon cluster. Now that Avalon cluster has grown by 2 to 148, and also that one other case mentioned yesterday came from a known case in Wollongong. The bad news is, though, testing rates are still low. We only had about 19,000 tests in the last reporting period. Acting Premier John Barilaro says he really wants to see that testing rate ramp right back up, and he has not ruled out shutting down certain postcodes where cases are continuing to climb.
Ruby, from today, police have the power to fine people for not wearing masks in some areas. What are the rules around it?
That's right. So if you're a resident of Greater Sydney, and that includes Wollongong, the Blue Mountains and the Central Coast, you will have to wear a mask in some indoor areas from today or risk a $200 fine. So we're talking about all public transport, supermarkets, shopping centres, places of worship, nail and hair salons. If you're in one of these places and you're not wearing a mask and you don't have a medical exemption or a reasonable excuse, police can fine you $200 on the spot. Now, they say they are going to use discretion with this. They understand that there's a period of adjustment, so they say not to worry, just try and remember to take your mask with you when you leave home. So you've got it with you if you want to go into any of these places, pop it on. That's the message coming through. But speaking of compliance, we've heard over the weekend about a wedding reception that went ahead in Fairfield in Sydney's west, which is not too far from here actually, in Berala. 600 to 700 people in attendance at this wedding reception, which was clearly breaking the 1 person per 4 square metre rule. New South Wales Police Minister David Elias says he's appalled and that it's a blatant breach of the rules. The operator of that business is a man in his 40s, and he's been fined $5,000 for breaching the COVID restrictions there.
Elias, you're in Melbourne. There have been huge queues at testing sites across the city, but authorities are promising to ramp up capacity today.
That's right, Isk. With the Black Rock cluster now at 21 infections, authorities will be eager to get this under control, so it has the option of easing restrictions on that January the 11th date. Critical to that, of course, will be testing, but the system is under strain with 60,000 people returning from New South Wales being asked to get tested and many of the Department of Health staff out on holidays. But the department has promised that a lot of them will be coming back and perhaps nurses and midwives will be called upon to increase testing capacity and staff levels by about 300 over the next week. And of course, this comes after we saw long lines of people queuing at testing sites, sometimes 1.5 kilometres long. People were even turned away from testing sites, much to their frustration. The testing commander of the Department of Health, Jerome Weimer, has urged people to remain patient while they increase this capacity. He also says that this cluster, he's confident that this cluster is under control, with the 3 cases yesterday in isolation and 2,700 people being monitored in some way. Now, there are 51 exposure sites now, so people are being urged to check the website for those, and if they visited them and they have the mildest symptoms, they should immediately get tested.
Elias, Clure in Melbourne and Ruby Cornish in Sydney, thank you to both of you. Now, Queensland Health has ramped up the state's coronavirus testing capacity after long weekend wait times in Brisbane and the Gold Coast, which saw people queuing for hours in the sun. Opening hours have been extended at the state's 76 clinics following a test and isolate direction issued to anyone who's been in Victoria since December the 21st. From this morning, these travellers aren't permitted to visit aged care facilities, hospitals, disability accommodation and correctional facilities. Workers on the JobKeeper wage subsidy will be getting $200 a fortnight less from today as the federal government scales back the scheme. Subsidised workers will get $1,000 a fortnight if they're full-time employees. Those working less than 20 hours a week will get $650 a fortnight. It follows a reduction last week to the coronavirus supplement for the unemployed.
Dozens of breaches by private security guards have been identified in South Australia's hotel quarantine program. Police figures provided to a state parliamentary committee show privately hired security officers breached protocol 99 times. The figures show 23 instances of guards falling asleep, and one report involved a security officer appearing to smell of alcohol whilst on duty. 35 PPE breaches were also reported.
I think the fact that we've seen this regular reporting of instances such as use of mobile phones or inappropriate wearing of PPEs is an example of the system working.
India has approved a locally developed coronavirus vaccine despite it not completing phase 3 trials. The Drugs Regulatory Authority gave the green light to the locally developed Covaxin at the same time as it cleared the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has called it a decisive turning point. India, which has the world's second highest COVID infection numbers with more than 10 million cases, plans to vaccinate 300 million people this year.
The British Prime Minister has warned that coronavirus restrictions in many parts of the country are likely to get tougher. Britain is dealing with record case numbers as a new highly transmissible variant of the virus spreads. Most of the country is currently under tough Tier 4 restrictions, but the opposition is pushing Boris Johnson to implement a total national lockdown in the next 24 hours.
It may be that we need to do things in the next few weeks that will be tougher in many parts of the country. I'm fully reconciled to that.